Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all have had a great and fabulous day. Hope you all had a great week because it has been a week since I've spoken with you. Today I want to go over the relationship that addiction has with grief. I will do this in a 2-part series just because there's a lot to cover. And because of my personal experience with it, I think that this will be a lot to cover and a lot to go through because I'm going to share my testimony with it in hopes that it helps you cope with grief and loss. And especially when I did my research with this, I realized how much coverage there was on it. And then I realized how much that I actually went through this myself. Um, I always like to give some Bible references, and I will tell you, I went through the Bible and I wanted to pull a few Bible verses out that will help you through any type of grief or loss. And as I'm doing my research, there is a Bible verse that I had already chosen that popped up during my research. So we are definitely going to listen. I want you to meditate on this particular Bible verse, and it is Revelations 21:4. Okay, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later, but I want you to really meditate and go to that Bible verse and listen to it. God gave it to me twice this morning when I was going through my planning and research and all that to do this episode, and this one popped out at me twice. So guys, that is just confirmation from the Lord. And I want you, if you're dealing with any type of suffering, loss, grief, it don't have to be intertwined with addiction, but we're gonna discuss that in just a second. But if you are having trouble with the loss of a loved one, or the loss of a divorce, or the loss of a child, and you're trying to get custody back, anything, the loss of your home, the loss of a job, it doesn't matter what it is. I want you to go to that Bible verse and I want you to read it. I want you to read it. I want you to sit with it, and I want you to pray with God, and I want you to get really connected with this Bible verse. So the other ones were, my kids and I are doing Bible reading every night, and we're doing the Bible in a year. And right now we are actually in Job. So it's kind of funny how this ended up connecting and running into each other the way it did. But when I think about loss and grief, I automatically, as most of us that have read the Bible and are walking with the Lord, a lot of us tend to think about Job. Job was a wealthy man. Job had it all. He had it going for him. You know, he had a big, happy family. He was rich. He had everything he needed. He didn't lack or want for anything, okay? But he was also a God-fearing man. He loved the Lord with all his heart. You know, he's very faithful to the Lord. And of course, you know, Satan had to get in the middle. You know, he always has to get in the middle of things. And he jumps in and he says, you know, tells the Lord, I dare you to test Job. He will falter. He will fail you. He will not be loyal and faithful to you, because if you wipe everything out, take everything away from him. And, you know, the Lord allowed it. The Lord allowed it. So guys, I want you to understand that when we go through a loss or a grief, it is not an actual loss. It is a gain. Okay. And I will help you understand. Grief is not a loss. It may feel like that emotionally, physically. It may feel like it's a loss, but it's not. It's a gain. It is a gain, because when we lose something, we gain the Lord. Okay. And he gives us back everything that's been taken away, times 10, times 20, times 40. Doesn't matter. He will give it, he will return it back to you. Okay. Um, so I wanted to use Job as a reference, and I want to actually go over to Job. I have 3 verses for you, and I want us to go to Job 6 and 2. So if you want to write these down, you can. So that is Job chapter 6, verse 2. Then we're going to go to Job chapter 17, verse 7. Again, that is Job 17, verse 7. And then we're going to hop over to Job 16, verse 5. And that is Job 16 and 5. So if you'll give me a minute to get on over where I need to be. I should be more prepared than this. It's okay. That gives you time to get where you're needing to be. Goodness gracious. I was not prepared. Lord, forgive me. Okay. So we're going to go to Job 6 and 2. And this is Job's second speech, and he's we actually have read this last night, my kids and I. And if I do not say this name right, y'all please forgive me. I struggle with some of these biblical names. But Job is going through, he just lost everything. Everything's been wiped away from him. His wife tempted him to sin against God, and so his friends have come to him and they're trying to blame him. So how often do we go through something where we lose something and our friends are telling us, "Hey, because you sinned, this is why God took things away from you." How many times have we done that ourselves to our friends? We have felt guilty to that, and I actually had that happen to me one time before, where I was going through a separation that ended up leading to a divorce. And I actually had a friend come to me and tell me, the reason why things aren't working out for you is because you're sinning against God. You're having sex outside of marriage, and you're not doing things right. But how many times, even though that may have been true, but how many times have we heard that, and thank God allows things to happen so that we can come to ourselves. And just like with addiction, we have to come to the end of ourselves and come to him completely. So in Job 6, this is his second speech. He's responding back to Eliphaz, and they're having a conversation, but he's having a conversation with his friends about why things are happening the way they are. And his friends, again, they're blaming him for his sins. And so I just want you to hear how Job responds, okay? And it says, "If my sadness could be weighed and my troubles be put on the scales, they would be heavier than all the sands of the sea." Your sadness and trouble may not compare to Job's, okay? But it's not unrighteous to admit your burdens to God. It's okay to go to him and say, "Look, I don't understand this loss. I don't understand why you took this person away from me." So tell him, be real with him. Tell him all the difficulties you face. Be as honest as you can. That's what he wants from you. Abandon any pretense and transparently tell God about your troubles. He wants to hear from you. So if you're experiencing a grief, a loss, you just lost someone, go to him. He wants to hear what you have to say. Let's go on over to Job 17 and 7. Well, here, let's go to 16 and 5 first. Let's do this in order. So Job is going to respond again. This is the 5th time he's responded to Eliphaz. And this is what he says in 16 and 5. He says, "But that's not what I would do. I would speak in a way that helps you. I would try to take away your grief. So he's basically, saying, I wouldn't speak harshly about your grief. I would help you through it. Um, I wouldn't tell you you're sinning and that's the reason why you just lost your favorite person, your husband, your wife, your child, your job. Okay? But I would come to you with comfort and support. And that's how he's responding to that. And in Job 17:7, he continues to defend his innocence because he's got his faith and trust in the Lord, okay? So in Job 17:7, it says, "My eyes are dim with weeping, and I am but a shadow of my former self." Um, God will defend you, okay, if you let him. By his grace, you stand pure and blameless in his sight. So you need to thank him for his vindication. He sees your sorrows, okay? He knows you're crying and weeping for the loss. He gives you comfort while you're in your tears. I want you to understand that he is your comforter, okay? I want to go into the stats of grief and addiction. If you know me and how you've listened to any of these, you've come to know that I love to put statistics in here because it gives some sort of realness to grief and addiction. And there's 4 ways that grief can lead to addiction. That is hiding from and never dealing with grief. Number 2 is using drugs and alcohol to cope. Number 3 is replacing a person or a relationship with a substance. And number 4 is lacking the proper coping skills. And we're going to go through those. So the first one, a way that grief can lead to addiction is we hide from and never deal with our grief. We hide from it. Grief is very intense. It's an intense emotion. We experience it at our darkest moments. It can be extremely painful, and our denial of this pain can be very strong. Whether consciously or unconsciously, we may hide our grief or we may push it away. But I'm here to tell you that doesn't get rid of it, okay? You have to face it head on. Face to face, you have to come to grips with it. Emotions are very complex. We all know this. Emotions can get the best of us because they can hit us right straight to the gut, to the heart. But we have to deal with it so that we can be healed. If we don't deal with our emotions and we leave them untouched, it can cause us to use drugs and alcohol in order to forget it and ignore it. Me as a walking testimony, I will tell you right now that is super, super, super true. When we use our substances, they become a crutch, and that it inevitably leads to addiction. Number 2, we use drugs and alcohol to cope. I was one of those that did that, okay? It can rob you of the current moment, and it won't take your pain away. It will numb you and make you feel like all that pain is gone at that moment. But when you come down from that high, when you come sober from that alcohol, that pain comes right back. We drank or used to forget, to get out of our minds for the moment, but only for a short time does that work. Okay, because grief is everlasting. Okay, grief is a part of life. It's not going to go away. But it isn't worth the cost to use drug and alcohol. It always, always, always has consequences following behind it. Alcohol is a depressant. It can make us feel worse after we use it. It can create more negative feelings, including depression, anxiety, stress, guilt, shame, and even health issues. Cirrhosis of the liver comes from alcohol. That can kill you. I have known someone to die from it. A physical and psychological addiction, excuse me, can develop all from using drugs and alcohol to escape grief. Sorry. Number 3, replacing a person or a relationship with a substance. This can also intertwine when we go through a divorce or we go through a breakup. So this is also for that. When someone close to us dies or we lose an important relationship, we might lose a husband, a wife, we might be going through a divorce, or we might have just lost our child to the system, or we may have a never-ending battle with our parent and we're done with them, or they are done with us. Okay, that happens. There's a possibility we'll try to replace that person or relationship. It might be too painful to try and learn to live without them, and drugs and alcohol can easily become our replacement. None of us plan on this happening, but it can and it does. Feeling empty, knowing you will never see, speak to, or hear from someone you love ever again can be devastating. Not that it can, it is devastating. When the means of escape are there, you can easily become hooked on substances that allow you to momentarily feel relief. When we find solace and relief by substances over and over again and create a dangerous relationship with drugs and alcohol, that is exactly how addiction starts. So please be careful with how you cope with a loss, okay? And that leads to number 4, lacking the proper coping skills. Guys, we were not given a manual growing up. We might have had the perfect parents. We might have had someone that tried to lead us on the right path, but sometimes we steer away. The only perfect manual to life is the Holy Word, the Bible, okay? There's a chance we might not learn the healthiest coping mechanisms, even if we have the greatest parents. Many smart people who are successful in every area of their life still might not have the tools to deal with a crushing pain of grief or loss. They don't know there's people that have grown up and never experienced a grief or loss until they are an adult. Or maybe they experienced one as a child and don't remember it because they were so young. And they may have coping skills, but may be unable to use them when tragedy strikes. Alcohol is so popular for coping in our society, especially today. We often see advertisements on TV, on social media, telling us to use alcohol as a way to relax, or cheers for a celebration, or even a glass of wine after a bad day. I've even seen somewhere where the doctor tells you a glass of wine a day is good for you, is good for your health. No, it is not. Especially if you are someone that has battled addiction. You stay away from that alcohol. Guys, I'm here to admit it. Until I dealt with myself, even after I got away from hard street heavy drugs, I still had problems with alcohol. I still had problems with my prescription medication. I still had addiction to that. I would find myself still wanting to use alcohol as a way to escape myself. I went through a breakup after recovering from a strong street drug. I went through a heavy breakup, and what did I use? I used my prescription pills, overuse of them, and I turned to alcohol. Did I break free from that? Yes, but I had to end myself to start with the Lord so that I can create a new life for myself, because that wasn't the way to live. So when these suggestions are surrounding us, it's almost like, we see the advertisement, hey, use this to relax. Let's sit on the beach with a beer in our hand. It's just a form of relaxation. It's almost like peer pressure when we see that. It's not surprising that alcohol and drugs can be used to cope with grief. And again, it leads to a life-altering addiction. But here's the good news. Grief can be handled without using drugs and alcohol to cope. I didn't know that because I didn't experience that, but I know that now. Addiction doesn't have to be the end result of losing a loved one. And that can be addiction to anything. It doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. Maybe you're addicted to eating. You're eating a lot because you just need to get rid of that emotion of losing a loved one. Pain and loss are a normal part of life. There are healthy ways to deal with this. Alcohol and drugs or any form of addiction are only momentarily for relief, but their risks are far greater. Their risks are far greater. I want to talk about what complicated grief is. There's grief and then there's complicated grief. Complicated grief, it causes significant distress, difficulty with daily functioning. You cannot go throughout your day without dealing with some type of distress because of the loss of a loved one. This a lot of times happens in the early stages of it. Someone who suffers from complicated grief may experience sleep disturbances. You're waking up all throughout the night. You can't go to sleep. You may have suicidal thoughts. I done this. You want to end your life so you can go be with your loved one. That is real. Relationship problems. You may not can find. I dealt with this. I've been single because I have finally learned that finding a relationship with someone to cover up a loss doesn't work because I'm again chasing something that I'm not going to replace because it's not going to ever be replaced. Maybe you have increased drug and alcohol use. According to research, complicated grief may be especially common among those who have lost someone to an overdose because unexpected death is one of the risk factors for this form of grief. I got this information from the Mission Harbor Behavioral Health, and that last part hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone that has experienced a death, a loss of a loved one to overdose, will deal with complicated grief. And here's where I want to tell you my testimony. And before, when I would speak, and before I gained inner healing and gained my walk with the Lord and used Him as my comfort, I could talk about this part of my life and would not be able to get through it without sobbing, without crying so hard that I couldn't even speak. I dealt with a lot of guilt from this. 2018, the year 2018, was a year that wrecked my entire life. That is the year that my whole life turned for the worst. Guys, my whole life turned for the worst. That is the year that I lost someone very near and dear to my heart. And now I have a child that is growing up without their father. I lost him on July 4th. And for 3 years after that, I was lost in sin. I was lost in this world. I turned to drugs because of the way he went out of here and the way that he passed away. I went through the suicidal thoughts. I wanted to end my life and tried to end my life to be with him because I felt so much guilt because while he was here on this earth, I did not treat him very well. I was very ugly to him. I refused to let him see his daughter about 95% of the time. I talked ugly to him. I kept his daughter from him. So I really, really, really went through a complicated grief time in my life. And I just could not function, to the point where I lost everything, to the point where I turned to the hardest drugs you could put in my system. I did it all and didn't care about my life. I didn't care about others. I didn't care about nothing. All I could soak and meditate on was the loss of him. Um, I ended up in jail twice. I ended up physically assaulting a police officer. I physically could not handle myself. I lost my kids for a short period of time, and I just was not who I should have been. I did not handle that part of grief, that part of my life, dealing with grief the way that I should. Um, every bad thing that you could possibly do besides murder, I did it. I stealed, I cussed, I drank heavy, I fought physically, I used drugs, every drug that you could give me, I was on it, buddy. And let me tell you, all that did was create more trouble in my life, more chaos in my life. Not to mention, I was bouncing from relationship to relationship because I tried to fill that void. Even though I wasn't in a relationship with him, I still used that as a coping mechanism. And every relationship was toxic. Every single one of them was toxic. And I allowed it to be. And I only say this because um, some of you may be experiencing the very, very, very same things. And I'm here to tell you, it will lead you to a life of destruction. The first night that I went to jail, this was, let's see, he died in July. So this would be April of the following year. 2019 was the roughest year of my life. So just months later, 9 months later, I guess that would be right. I lost it, completely lost it. And I was so out of it that all I remember was I'm waking up in a jail cell. And the only stories that I get are from the stories of those that found me unconscious. EMS was called to me. I was told that I flatlined 2 or 3 times on the way to the hospital. I ended up later on, once I was healed from this, I went later on and got my papers from the hospital, and I was erratic. I was fighting the EMS. I was fighting the nurses. They were doing everything they could. I was Narcan. Eventually, when they found me, that night before I went to the hospital, I was unconscious and unresponsive at the foot of the steps to my house where I lived, on the ground. Um, and they had to Narcan me to revive me. Um, I don't remember any of it. I was completely blacked out. And that was just how reckless I was with my life because of losing someone. I used his death as an excuse to be reckless. Let's not do that. I mean, we do not need to do that, because it only ended up in more hurt, more pain, more chaos, more trouble, more torment. I went through it all. I ended up There's so much to my story, you guys. There's so much. It turned into, oh my goodness. I mean, we would have to be here all day for me to get through it. But just know that I ended up facing death multiple times. I mean multiple times. I went through physical abuse. I went through um jail again. I went through alcohol. Guys, I can just go on and on, until finally I had to come to the end of terms with myself and say, look, this is not the way to cope with this. Grief is real, and grief hit me like a ton of bricks. It felt like an 18-wheeler had ran over me 10 times, and I did not know how to cope. I didn't have instructions on how to deal with this. Instead, Satan really came in and had his way with me, and I allowed it. I lived for him and loved it. And this morning I did a research on how many deaths there was in 2018 to overdose. And that was 67,367. One of those being my child's father. Guys, I'm here to tell you this because I care about you and because I don't want to see you end up where I did or he did. If you're dealing with a grief or a loss, don't try to cope with things not meant for you to cope with, things that are toxic, things that are not good for you. Because the Lord knows about your grief. He sees your grief. He knows that you're going to go through this before it ever happens. And He's there to comfort and guide you. He's there to help you through it all. He doesn't want you to deal with this by yourself. He's not going to let you deal with it by yourself. You just have to put your faith and trust in Him. You have to know that He is there and He's going to hug you and love on you and let you know that it's going to be okay. Even if you've dealt with a loss and you don't turn to any type of addiction, you don't turn to any type of drugs or alcohol, and you just can't bear with the loss of this loved one. You don't understand why. You're like Job. You don't understand why these things are happening. You've been so faithful. You've been to the Lord every day. You've lived for Him since you were young. You go to church every Sunday. Why did this happen to me, Lord? Why did you take this person away from me, Lord? Why? Why couldn't they stay here any longer? My question is to you is why would you want them here? Why would you want them here on this nasty, forsaken, disturbing, evil-filled world? Why would you want them here? I know it's because the dealing with the loss is not the human itself. It's the loss of their presence. It's the loss of their voice. It's the loss of their character, the way they loved you. It's the loss of that. But you have to know that it isn't a loss. Emotionally, it is. But spiritually, it's not. Heaven has gained an angel. Jesus has gained them back. Jesus has told us, He's told us, we are only here for a short amount of time, and one day we will all be called home again, and we will be called home. We know that time is coming, but we don't know how to handle it and deal with it when it does come. We're constantly going through this state of grief every day. You have to understand that the Lord makes no mistakes. He knows what He is doing. He knows that you are hurt. He knows that you are suffering. He knows all of this. But He also knows that you do not have to do this alone. And He wants you to know that. He wants you to understand that He is here for you. And that one day you're going to be called home too. One day He's going to come down and get you just as He got your loved one and bring you back home to be with Him and your loved one. So grief is not a loss, it is a gain. And I want you to understand that this is only temporary. We are only here temporary. And we have a date and a time that our time is going to be up. So we need to take our every moment of every part of our life, even when it comes to loss and grief and losing everything we have, and use that time to thank the Lord for our loss. Thank Him for it. I know that doesn't sound normal to you, but that's what He tells us to do. We are to thank Him for our losses and our gains, because they all create who we are. They all are part of our story. They all are a part of our life. And when we are at our lowest and we have experienced our loss is when we can find Him the most. He allows these things to happen to us so that we can gain a better relationship with Him. When we are at our lowest and have nothing and we've been robbed of everything we have nowhere else to turn but to Him. We should do it before that, but sometimes that's the way it works because we are humans and we were created to make mistakes. But I just want you to understand that grief is not a loss, it is a gain. And I want you to reach out your hand and let the Lord grab you and take hold of you to help you cope through this grief. Because you are not alone. You don't have to do it alone. He loves you. He cares for you. He comforts you. And everything is going to be okay. It may not seem like it now, but it will. I will end that with that, and I will do part 2 next week because there's just so much to cover, and I hope just this one right here gave you enough hope to get through today. If you need help, reach out. Find someone to pray for you or pray with you. Reach out to me. I say it all the time. Reach out to me. Let me pray for you. Leave a comment that you need praying for. Email me, aprilquinn30@gmail.com. If you don't feel like reaching out to me on the YouTube channel, reach out to me through social media on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. Find me. Send me a message. Reach out to me. I want to pray for you. I want to love on you just a little bit like Jesus would. I want you to feel His presence. I pray that He comes down and He touches your heart and He touches your mind and He takes away that pain and fills it with His love. I love you. I'm praying for you. And remember, God loves you too. I will see you all next week for part 2 of Grief, a Gain and Not a Loss.